Already turned on to our program. This is Never Again Live podcast series with Meir Jolovitz as our host. He'll be with us shortly, as well as a special guest. So without any further ado, let's get rolling. A little countdown while I get the studio up and running on our end over here. Please do share us and whatever mechanism you use to watch us, either on your iPads or on your cell phones or on your PCs, laptops. Share this as soon as you can and as much as you can. All our episodes are also available on our website, which is israelnow.ca, as well as on our YouTube station and on Facebook. So let's get started with today's program. And I do want to wish everybody a happy Rosh Hashanah. This is, once again, the Never Again Live podcast series with Meir Jolovitz. We come to you usually on either Sundays or Wednesdays, but just keep your eyes open in social media because we do let as many people know as possible, as many sites. Happy Rosh Hashanah, 5783, Lashana Tova, from israelnow.ca. As I mentioned, Meir Jolovitz is our host. He'll be with us shortly. And the voice you hear, the silent, yet not so often silent partner in the corner is me, work in the studios here. Please do know that we do have a chat going on, so anybody who can see it on our YouTube or Facebook, please give us a comments or questions or concerns, or just get involved, share us, like us, and become part of the conversation. As I mentioned, we do have a special guest with us, will be joining us shortly. That's Meir Jolovitz, who, in his many accolades, he was the past National Executive Director of the Zionist Organization of America. He's a Middle East analyst, and he writes, and he's quite prolific. Tonight, we're going to discuss Yair Lapid's address, which he made to the United Nations General Assembly. And as we need to give credit where credit is due, he said a lot of very positive, very strong, very emotional things. He also said some things that we feel probably could have been left out of his speech, but we'll get to that shortly in our discussion. I think the easiest way to get the general commentary on his speech out of the way is to borrow the sound from I-24 News. Today's program is going to be called, What About Lapid's Comments? Which were good, which were bad, and which were just plain ugly. There we have Lapid posing for his movie poster, Yair Lapid's Good, Bad, and the Ugly. So what can we say about his speech? Let's hear.
Just heard Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid speaking at the United Nations General Assembly. I'm Khaled Ben David. This is a special edition of The Rundown. It was a dramatic speech by the Prime Minister, certainly the most major one that he's given on an international stage there. He did speak about the threat of Iran, as has previous Prime Ministers of Israel. But he also did mention his support for a two-state solution with the Palestinians and spoke strongly about that. That has generated some controversy here. And then, of course, he injected some personal tone into his speech, speaking about Israel's need for speech. I'm with Owen Alterman, our senior correspondent, Mark Regev, who was the former Israeli ambassador to the UK, former spokesman and advisor to prime ministers. Owen, I just want to start with you. Yes, he did speak about the two-state solution. Yes, he spoke about Iran, but I think what it was really dramatically different here was the tone, especially how personal it was.
Absolutely. It was a riveting speech. It was well crafted, some parts more riveting than others, Khaled. But, the run-up to this speech was dominated by this idea of recognizing the Palestinian state, right? By recognizing and supporting the two-state solution. That's been all over Israeli media for the last 24 hours, been the central subject of discussion. But now that we've actually seen and listened to and watched the full speech, I think it can't be reduced to that kind of caricature. It can't be reduced to the caricature of a left-tacking Yair Lapid who is bringing out support for a Palestinian state because of some kind of political strategy in the elections. This was a much richer speech. It did include that, but also very tough language on Iran, and also a new rhetorical twist, I think. And it'll be interesting to hear what Mark Regev has to say about this. For an Israeli leader, linking Israel's information campaign and public diplomacy on the Palestinian issue, or Iran for that matter, with the worldwide trend of fake news and disinformation and framing it in that way, I think a different kind of twist to a very well-tested and tried and true Israeli argument. So I thought that was interesting, and you're right, personal. Of course, the Holocaust appears in a Yair Lapid speech. It always does, and maybe it must, and maybe it should. Again, we heard about the Negev summit. One does wonder, of course, it's well-placed and newsworthy and appropriate to put it there. One wonders how long the shelf life is going to be for the Abraham Accords, the Negev summit, as a rhetorical tool for Israeli leaders. How many more years this is going to continue to open speeches as a strong talking point. But that's a discussion for another day. Again, I thought very strong language on Iran. Policy-wise, very, I think, concisely laying out where Israel's red lines are and how Israel sees its policy toward Iran. Not many surprises, but I think interesting. But I think that the main takeaway, Caleb, is a riveting, well-crafted speech that is going to be very, very hard to pigeonhole as a left-wing speech, at least for those who watched and listened to the full thing.
Well, let me get a response to that. Let us go and speak with the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, who is now a candidate, a Likud candidate for the Knesset. I think it's safe to say he will be serving in the Knesset in the coming months. But in the meantime, Ambassador Danon, you actually have already, prior to the speech, you had criticized the reports already that he was going to be speaking about the two-state solution. Prime Minister Lapid, you said it would set Israel diplomacy back by a decade. I'm sure there were things in the speech you agreed with, but I just want to get your take on it.
So indeed, like you mentioned, Prime Minister Lapid touched the main points. But let's analyze what happened before the speech. He chose to put in the spotlight the issue of a Palestinian state. That was a huge mistake because everybody spoke about this issue where we wanted everybody to speak about the Iran deal. And it proved to us that Prime Minister Lapid actually put his campaign before the country. He was signaling to the Arab parties in Israel about his future aspirations and basically sending them a clear message about him wanting the support of the Arab parties in the next coalition. I think it was a mistake. I think after he saw what was the attitude here in Israel in the last few hours before his speech, he went back to the main points, speaking about Iran, speaking about other points that are important for Israel. And I think he should have done it from the beginning without actually leaking the idea of a two-state solution or a surprise about two-state. It was irrelevant.
Well, I want to get your opinion, Mark. You have a lot of experience. You worked for a prime minister, probably contributed to some of his speeches at the United Nations. I'm talking about Benjamin Netanyahu.
I think we all get the point there. We'll discuss more of that later. We don't need to listen to more of the analysis of the speech. I'm sure most of you have already heard it. What I think is pretty interesting is bringing up the two-state solution when we all know that in 1948, Israel agreed to live in peace with her Arab neighbors. And we know how far that got us. That got us into almost the extermination of our people. And if that was the end of it, and we haven't heard since then, but what's happened since 1948? Well, let's review. Then, with the Palestinians, we have the Oslo Accords, Camp David deals, the Annapolis Peace Summit. Many people don't even know about it. Go Google Annapolis Peace Summit, the Hebron Agreement, all our attempts to make peace with the Palestinians. We want to make peace. We give land for peace. We lose land, we lose lives, and there's been no peace. The White River Memorandum, the Tammuz Summit, the Roadmap to Peace, the Arab Peace Initiative. Again, the concept of two-state solution was a good dream decades ago. And now it's become a nightmare. And speaking of Meir, we're going to bring Meir on pretty soon. We have two mayors tonight, which is quite a treat. But this is how we get a response to our initiatives for peace. This is what they teach their children and their children's children. So we put out a hand for an olive branch, and this is what they return. From Gaza, which could have been a mecca of a city and proven to the world what the Palestinians can do, Yasser Arafat passed away with an estate billions of dollars. There's no Arafat Medical Center, Arafat Theater, Arafat, all there are missiles and bombs. think Einstein said it quite well when he said the world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. Here at israelnow.ca, we don't look on and do nothing. We're active, we're proactive, we fight anti-Semitism, and please join us. Only together can we defeat anti-Semitism. So join us at israelnow.ca. And without any further ado, I'm going to bring one of the mayors onto the screen.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Let me wish everyone, all our viewers, all our supporters and friends, Shana Tova. Great way to bring in the new year. There's a lot of optimism. On Rosh Hashanah, something historic happened. Yosef Karadawi, the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, he was the one who gave the direction, who taught Hamas and the supporters of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood that they should engage in suicide bombings against Israel, that they should be killing Jews in Israel in their hope to destroy the Jewish state. Just a few hours ago, earlier today, the Ram Party, that's part of this coalition government, spearheaded by Yair Lapid, they mourned the death of Yosef Karadawi, who died on Rosh Hashanah. That should be a sign to the Jewish people. One, it's a good thing that the enemies of the Jewish people die. Two, it's significant to us that he died on Rosh Hashanah, means that going forward, we have to be free of our enemies, those who want to annihilate us. And equally important is to understand that that Ram Party, like I said, they're mourning his death. And Yair Lapid, who made this speech, who's being praised in certainly progressive Jewish circles on the left, and people in the center are examining it. The Jewish people must understand that if he's going to reach out to the Ram Party and they're mourning the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, you can't make deals with that. Do you want a Jewish state? What's the essence of the speech by Yair Lapid? He called Israel a cultural mosaic, where Arabs are our partners. I wish the Arabs running these Arab parties in Israel were people like Yosef Haddad, who fully condemns terrorism, condemns these Arab parties, in fact, condemns the leaders, says they shouldn't be allowed to be in the Knesset. I wish the representatives of the Arab parties were like Yosef Haddad. They're not. They are against Israel as a Jewish state. So when Yair Lapid talks about a two-state solution and says that Israel is a cultural mosaic and that the Arabs in Israel are our partners, and there are studies, recent studies that came out and said that over 75% of Arab Israelis, Arab citizens of Israel, reject the right of the Jewish people to have a state. So I don't think we should be playing any games. We should understand what we're dealing with here. So if he's reaching out to these Arab parties to join him in a possible future government, and if they would get significant numbers and representation in the Knesset, could you imagine if they had cabinet positions and then they are discussing, on the one hand, what is a Jewish state? They're going to discuss it. These Arab leaders who reject Israel's existence as a Jewish state, and the boundaries of this kind of two-state. What would they say about a two-state? What are the boundaries according to Yosef Karadawi? Anyways, I don't want to talk a lot right now about that. We have Meir Jolovitz, who's, I know him for many, many years, going back to the days of the Jewish Defense League, when he was the national chairman in the United States. And I was running it here in Canada, and We look up to our rabbi, Rabbi Meir Kahana, what he said about a Jewish state. You know, you talk about giving up land, but, you know, are we going to have a Jewish state even? Meir Jolovitz is with us. I want to ask him some questions, and he's going to give a lot of in-depth information about what is really going on. Meir, it's a pleasure to see you. How are you doing?
I'm well, and thank you once again for hosting.
Great. Meir, what's your take on this whole thing? The Yair Lapid speech at the UN. Tough on Iran. Not bad. Everybody agrees. It's a threat. They want to wipe us out completely. But the issue of a Jewish state, the issue of Arab parties, this kind of coalition. You know, I mentioned Yosef Karadawi died on Rosh Hashanah, and the Ram party, his partner, is mourning the death of him. He was the inspiration for suicide bombers throughout Israel. So fill us in, fill in the gaps. How do you analyze this whole thing?
Okay. I will comment specifically about the tone of the speech. The only thing that I agree with the comment that was made prior to your speaking from I-24 was the fact that it was a well-crafted speech. I will say this. It's unconscionable to imagine that any speech given by any proponent of Israel would not begin with and not end with the same matter. And that is that the core of the problem in the Middle East is the Arab refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. That is the theme that underscores everything that we talk about. Everything else is simply background noise. And if you listen to the speech, as I said, well crafted, and you mentioned, he talked about a cultural mosaic. He began by talking about, now mind you, Lapid'S, and we can get into the detail of it, he's the interim prime minister. He was not elected prime minister. He's the caretaker prime minister. He'll be prime minister until a number of days past the election on the 1st of November, at which his party and the parties that made up the coalition that he now runs will no longer be in power. Bibi Netanyahu used to be the prime minister, and he will one day again be the prime minister. And I have issues with with Benjamin Netanyahu, which I'll get to. But the core of the problem in the Middle East is the Arab refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And the mistake that we proponents of Israel have made time and again, certainly in the last 3 or 4 decades, is that we've accepted the Arab narrative that this is an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is not an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Palestinians were manufactured in the 1960s. The fact that Finland belonged to the Finns and Australia belonged to, well, the Australians, it was necessary to create a Palestinians that would belong to, a Palestine, excuse me, that would belong to the Palestinians. The core of the problem is the Arab refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist. And in order not to get into the details, there is not a single Arab country, none, that recognizes Israel de jure, Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. Those couple of countries that have recognized Israel as a de facto existence, the fact that Israel exists. And those nations which sat as part of the Abraham Accords, once again, the misconception is that there was a peace agreement that was generated between those Gulf Arab states and Israel. That is also fraudulent. There was a normalization of relations. So if the truth matters, and it ought to, then we certainly need to speak it, even though we remain a minority within a minority. I don't know how long-winded you want me to be, but I can take that speech and analyze it piece by piece and show you that the problem is much, much greater than anyone would otherwise want us to believe.
Meir, delve right into it.
Okay.
Go right ahead. I hear you.
Let me begin with this. I threw a dart at Benjamin Netanyahu 2 days before the speech was given. And let me give perspective for those of the out there who don't listen or don't pay attention to the details. On September 21st, just a few days ago, actually, it was Joe Biden, who spoke at the United Nations and spoke about the need for a two-state solution. The following day, on the 22nd, it was Yair Lapid, Israel's temporary prime minister, who spoke of the need of a two-state solution. And the next day, on the 23rd, it was Mahmoud Abbas, president of the PA, who spoke about a two-state solution. And for each of those people, the two-state solution, I want to say, and it's quite important, means something else. And I will get to it. It means something else. But I want to come back to Benjamin Netanyahu. When Barack Obama was elected president of the United States in 2008, he took office in January of 2009. In June of 2009, a few months after Barack Obama became prime minister, he already began to place tremendous pressure against Israel to accept the two-state solution. And I will often speak of a two-state solution as a two-state illusion or two-state delusion, which it is. Well, Bibi Netanyahu made a terrible mistake, which he tried to walk back, and to this day still tries to walk back. Speaking at Ramat Gan University, in Bar-Ilan University in Ramat Gan, he said that there was a need for two states for two people. It was a terrible mistake, which he later attributed to pressure which was brought to bear by Obama. The day before Lapid spoke, Benjamin Netanyahu took to the airwaves and criticized Lapid's impending surrender to the two-state illusion and said that this is madness, that the concept of the two-state solution, two states to two people, shouldn't be discussed, and certainly not by an Israeli leader at the United Nations. Well, 4 years after he spoke at Bar-Ilan University in 2009, Benjamin Netanyahu spoke in 2013 also at Bar-Ilan University and admitted that he made a mistake, that the clarification was that he was in favor of a two-state solution. Once again, he called it two states for two people, with the provision that the state, the Palestinian state, would be demilitarized. That's what he said. And in 2016, by the way, many of the pundits who spoke just last week about the fact that this was the first time that an Israeli prime minister called for a two-state solution at the United Nations, that isn't true at all. On September 22nd, 2016, which happened to be 6 years to the day that Lapid called for a two-state solution, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel at the time, spoke at the United Nations, the General Assembly, and said two states for two people. So there's a certain disingenuous piece here on the part of the opposition. Today, Benjamin Netanyahu leads Likud in the opposition. They were as guilty. In fact, they might have been more guilty because precedent was set. Here's the difference that we need to understand. When Joe Biden spoke about the two-state solution, as he did on the 21st, and he did this before, mind you, when he visited Israel a number of weeks ago, he stood side by side with Mahmoud Abbas, and he spoke about the need for peace to be established on the basis of a two-state solution. And of course, he was criticized by Israel's right wing. Mahmoud Abbas, when he got his turn to speak, talked about the fact that the United States needed to help reverse the occupation of Israel. And when Mahmoud Abbas spoke about the occupation of Israel, and that is the dirty word today, occupation, he actually referenced it by saying the 74-year-old occupation. So Mahmoud Abbas was quite clear in suggesting that the occupation of Israel didn't happen in 1967, as Biden would have us believe, or as academics, or as American Jewish and perhaps Canadian Jewish organizations would have us believe, that the occupation began with the Six-Day War. For the Arabs, the occupation began with a Nakba, the catastrophe, in 1948. And then Lapid speaks, talks about a two-state solution, and he says a two-state solution with a peaceful Palestinian partner. We'll get to that in a second. And finally, on that last day, that Friday, the 23rd, Mahmoud Abbas not only calls for a two-state solution, he calls for a two-state solution as a stepping stone to the ultimate solution, which would be the final solution. Mahmoud Abbas, speaking at the United Nations, basically called on the United Nations to vote once again to implement Resolution 181, which was UN General Assembly Resolution 181 from November 29th, 1947. Mind you, before Israel became a state. We know it today historically as the partition resolution. It was the partition resolution which the Jews accepted, the Jews not yet in their own state, and that the Arabs rejected, suggesting that they would destroy Israel if Israel was ever declared. And they tried. So for Mahmoud Abbas, as recently as that Friday, the 23rd of September, he calls in the United Nations to reimpose, he called, a solution to the problem in the Middle East by imposing Resolution 181, which was in fact to bring Israel back not to the 67 borders, which should be accurately described as the armistice lines of 1949, but to the 1947 partition plan. It would be the end of Israel. But nobody seemed to notice, because he said, if you allow us to do this, then we can discuss and negotiate peace. If you give us tangibles for intangibles, we will further discuss peace. And anytime that an Arab speaks peace, the Israelis seem to have an orgasm. There's something terribly, terribly wrong with that. It's a recognition of the fact on their part, and it's a misbegotten one, that somehow Israel has a potential peace partner. Israel does not have a potential peace partner, and that potential peace partner, Mahmoud Abbas, who is 87 years old and is on death's door, he will not be. When we meet again, perhaps next time, it'll be somebody else. They'll be killing each other to find out who his replacement is. But the one thing that you know, whoever replaces him will subscribe to the same philosophy that we have today. And that philosophy is that the occupation is the problem in the Middle East. Before I stop this little piece that I'm expressing, I pulled out something. There aren't enough people who do the research. And the best place to do the research is to actually go not to Jewish sources, it's to go to the Arab sources. Because if we pay attention, they tell us exactly what their intention is. Now, I pulled something out just this past week. I knew what I was looking for. It was not difficult to find. The Oslo Peace Agreement, as they called it, was September 13th, 1993. We all remember the optics. It was when Shimon Peres and Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin shook the hand of Yasser Arafat and declared him a peace partner. The biggest mass murderer of Jewish children since Hitler all of a sudden was made a peace partner on President Clinton's White House lawn, and we had the beginning, the birth of Oslo. We also had a strategic and cosmetic move on the part of the Arabs, in which they decided not to refer to their camp as the PLO, but rather the Palestinian Authority, which became official in 1994. But I want to get back to that date, September 13th, 1993. On September 13th, 1993, the day of the signing of the so-called peace treaty with Israel, Yasser Arafat appeared on television. Now, mind you, the same day, September 13th, 93, Yasser Arafat appears on Jordanian television, and I want to read you 3 sentences that he spoke to Jordanian television on the day that he signed the peace treaty with Israel. This is what he said. Since we cannot defeat Israel in war, we do so in stages. We take any and every territory that we can of Palestine and establish a sovereignty there. And we use it as a springboard to take more. When the time comes, we can get the Arab nations to join us for the final blow against Israel. One just needs an IQ in double digits and a pulse to understand that there's nothing genuine about the Arab pretense of a peace with Israel. But nonetheless, pressure has been brought to bear by the European Union, by the United Nations, by the academic world, by media, by social media, and by Israeli politicians themselves, and American Jewish organizations, I should throw in, that Israel needs to, there's a simple formula they believe for peace in the Middle East. Israel gives, the Arabs get, and when the Arabs feel that they've gotten enough, there's going to be peace. This misbegotten formula for peace is what's going to lead to Israel's demise. And Israel needs to stand firm. The occupation, which for the Arabs began in 1948, which Joe Biden and most American Jewish supporters of Israel believe began in 1967, this occupation has become all of a sudden that cornerstone of a solution in the Middle East. The only thing that's going to bring peace in the Middle East is an absence of war. It's been said before. It was said by a Roman general. It was said, I think, by Benjamin Franklin. There is no peace to be found in the Middle East, but you can find an absence of war. And an absence of war can be gotten only through Israeli strength. That's the answer. Peace, even though it's a bogus peace, through strength. Otherwise, this notion of a two-state solution is really an illusion, and it's a delusion. And there's nothing more dangerous than proponents of Israel deluding themselves to believe that there's an actual peace partner.
Well, Meir, it seems like Israel does have strength. Their GDP is exploding, and now with these natural gas deals that they signed with Europe, technology is through the roof in Israel. Also on Rosh Hashanah, I didn't mention this, but the Nord Stream pipeline was completely sabotaged, and that would provide Europe with gas from Russia, and no longer, and they're going to be dependent on Israel for a good portion of their gas. Israel is strong. Why do we have others that are deluding our people?
Good question. Israel is absolutely strong. Israel does not have the resolve. And that's what the problem is. In 2006, when Israel was engaged in the Second Lebanon War, I was watching Fox News. I was at the time the National Executive Director of the ZOA, and I had the television going 24/7 with Israeli news broadcasts from Israel. And they were talking about in the Fox studio about the fact that the war at the time that I watched this, the war was in its 21st to 22nd day. Mind you, the war ended up lasting 34 days. And the question was asked in studio, how is it that Israel was able to overcome the enemy's major powers, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, in 1967, and vanquish them in 6 days, and they rested on the 7th, when Israel was having a difficult time with a bunch of terrorists in Lebanon. And the only person who gave an actual viable answer which made sense wasn't some high-ranking general or some defense minister, what have you. It was an American major, a major in the American Armed Forces, and when was asked, why is it that Israel so much stronger today, mind you, this is in 2006, than they were yesteryear, why is it that Israel has failed to destroy the enemy? And the answer that he gave is the one that too many people ignore. He said, because when Israel fought in 1967, Israel fought a military war. When Israel fought this war in 2006, they're fighting a political war. And Israel will never win a political war. You mentioned strength. In 1974, after Nixon stepped down, Gerald Ford became president of the United States. And Kissinger was doing his shuttle diplomacy. And Kissinger reported back to new President Ford that Israel was being intransigent. Israel apparently still suspicious of Arab intentions. Mind you, this is a very short period of time after the attack in Yom Kippur. And Kissinger blamed Israel. So in March of 1975, Gerald Ford said that he was going to hold back the promise of munitions to Israel, which included conventional weapons, included jet fighters. And he was going to do that until Israel would succumb to the pressures that were being being placed upon it by the Western world. And Israel basically didn't know what to do. I'm talking about Israel's strength. An article appears, article was about to appear. There was a preview of an article that was about to appear by Robert Tucker from Johns Hopkins University, which was to appear in Commentary magazine in November of 1975. It was Israel's nuclear option, in which he basically said, and mind you, it was not yet published, but we had seen the piece before it came out, and he basically said that the United States was making a terrible mistake. The mistake that the United States was making was in assuming that Israel would somehow capitulate to American pressure, whereas if Israel came to the conclusion that the Arabs were going to mount another assault against Israel, Israel would have no option but to go nuclear. When he was about to publish this piece, United States foreign policy decision makers saw this, became nervous, and immediately released the weapons that were promised Israel. Now, that and also a letter written by 76 senators in the United States at the time when there was indeed partisan support, right? Nonpartisan support. The Republicans and Democrats both supported. But I want to get to the point about the strength that you mentioned. At the time that Israel felt pressured by the American administration in 1975, Israel's GDP, Israel's GNP was 12.3 billion dollars.
Right.
Israel was receiving then from the United States $2.58 billion. So one could argue the $2.58 billion out of $12.3 billion is a significant sum, and Israel had every reason to be afraid of American pressure. And that's the reason a lot of people say Israel needs America. Israel needs America. It's this long-winded nonsense that we keep hearing. Well, let's move to today. Israel's GNP today is $372 billion. Israel receives from the United States $3.8 billion, which by the way isn't a gift. It's not a gift, and it comes with all kinds of conditions. So to suggest that Israel yesteryear was with a GDP of $12.3 billion and receiving $2.58 billion, you could see where pressures seemed to be relevant. Today, Israel with $372 billion, and Israel needs to separate itself and tell the United States, you will not dictate to us what we need to do, especially at a time when the Americans are doing exact opposite. The Americans are throwing all their money behind Iran, not if, but when an Iran nuke deal will be signed, and it will be. The Iranians get to over $100 billion in relief. $100 billion, which is what, 30 times as much as, 28 times as much as Israel gets. It's what Israel gets in 28 years. So this nonsense about Israel being pressured by the United States is something which is lost on Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid, when he became prime minister, followed the suit of Naftali Bennett. They decided that they were going to both run. Ultimately, they were going to do a joint government. One would be the alternate prime minister, and when a certain day came, and that day never came, they were going to flip. That day was supposed to be August of 2023. The government collapsed. According to the arrangement, Naftali Bennett steps down. Yair Lapid, who sat patiently with all his leftist ideas, all of a sudden becomes Israel caretaker prime minister and is making good on what he told the United States. We will not surprise you. He's talking about Iran. We will not surprise you. And as he's told people quite frequently and often privately, we trust that the United States isn't going to allow Iran to establish a nuclear bomb. We are a leaderless people. Yair Lapid, and by the way, let me just throw this. I like to throw in a dig every once in a while when I'm able to. So let me throw one in right now. Yair Lapid, who didn't graduate high school, learning disabled. Well, he's also leadership disabled. Yair Lapid now believes that the only way, and he's right, the only way that he can maintain any semblance of power is if he goes far left, which is where he belongs. But going far left means that he needs to court the Arabs. And he courts the Arabs. And that's the situation we found ourselves in today. On November 1st, it's not going to work for him. And I want to throw in a couple of numbers. Let me compare 2019 to 2022. A poll was done 5 elections ago. We all know there have been 4 elections since April of 2019. November 1st will be the 5th. In April of 2019, this is what the Israeli pollsters told us, that those people in Israel who leaned right were 49%, that those who were centrist were 33%, and those who were left-wing are 17%. Let me give you another juxtaposition. The 49% that leaned right in 2019 is today 62%. The 33% that were considered center, the centrists, are today 24%. And the 17% that were self-identified as leftists are today 11%. 11%. And therefore, if you look at the numbers, you see that there's no way in the world a right-wing government should ever not be elected in Israel. And the question, of course, is asked, so how did it happen that we have a left-wing government today? And that's because the right wing in Israel has never been tight, has never been together, has never consolidated, has never confederated. And if you look at the last election, the election of March 23rd of last year, in that election, 731,000 people cast their votes for right-wing parties, which ended up joining Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid on the left. It was a stolen election in that sense, that people who voted for them, thinking that they were going to be right-wing, didn't go right. Gideon Sa'ar with his New Hope Party pulled out of Likud. Avigdor Lieberman had pulled out a number of years before. Naftali Bennett had pulled out before. All these people running as right, Ayelet Shaked had pulled out. These are right-wing politicians who courted right-wing votes only to betray the people of Israel by going left. That will not happen again. Their little dance ends, well, it doesn't exactly on November 1st. The election will be held November 1st, and it'll take a short time for the opposition, today's opposition, to put together a government. And the only way that government will fail, and mind you, I caution you, this is the same government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who 3 times in 2009, 2013, and 2016 also called for 2 states with 2 people. Did he learn his lesson? Well, he certainly didn't seem to learn it in the past. But he learned the lesson that he can be moved out of office. And the only thing that's going to keep him out of office this time is if you have, once again, people voting for the right wing and defecting and going elsewhere. But as you know, because I know you've been very active while you were in Israel for a while, Israel's far right wing, as the others call it, we don't like to think of it as far right wing. We like to think of it as a common sense. It's a common sense. But Israel's right wing party, the real right wing party, is so much stronger. It's twice the strength as it was then, and they are the ones who are going to be the ones making a government with Likud.
The other significant factor with the Otzma Yehudit party, or they're calling it the National Religious Zionist Party.
Yeah, the religious Zionist, yes.
Right, is that they're getting the youth as well. It's incredible. They, Itmar Ben Gvir, he spoke at a high school, a major high school in Tel Aviv, which is supposed to be progressive to the left. And he had overwhelming support at the high school. That the left-wing press, Haaretz, and etc., they couldn't believe it, and they're condemning him. But he is getting support from the youth, and that's the future of the country as well,
Well,
Israel.
You're right and you're wrong, and allow me please to qualify that.
Go ahead.
First of all, you mentioned Tel Aviv, and it's remarkable that you mentioned that. 2 weeks ago, the Israeli, the mayor of Tel Aviv, a Labor Party activist, a leftist, Ron Huda'i, actually imposed a curriculum on all Israeli schools in Tel Aviv, all Jewish schools in Tel Aviv, in which the maps of the Middle East of Israel showed Israel in its pre-67 borders. Imagine, this is what the Israeli educational system that maps in, and the Arab parties all applauded him. They all applauded him. Okay, so now to get back to the point I said, there have been quite a number of studies that have been done over the decades, and they showed that the youth in Israel basically does lean right. But something else happens. In Israel, as most people know, anyone between the ages of 18 and 21, there's the requisite army service. During the votes that are taking place, the army vote, the soldier vote, always leans right. So you're talking about the 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, maybe even 22-year-olds, they vote right wing. But something terrible has happened in Israel, and this is not new. This is something which goes back to the 1980s. What happens is that once the soldiers in Israel complete their service, with a few exceptions that stay as career military people, they go to university. Israel is a nation, of course, which has a large percentage of its youth go to college. They go to universities. And when the same surveys are done of the same soldiers who, when they were 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, and they survey them when they're 22, 23, 24, and 25 years old, having gone through the liberal education of Israel's leftist university structure, they lean left. And that is a problem. That is a problem. And that is a reality of what goes on in the Middle East and in Israel. Notwithstanding the fact that most people in Israel do lean right, there is this philosophy which has been part of the Israeli concept for so many years. And the Hebrew words are nimas lanu, nimas lanu. It basically means enough already, enough already. And a lot of the people, through frustration, have decided, you know what? If we can give the Arabs a little, and it might be enough to placate them, and the only answer to that is, don't listen to what Mayor Weinstein is saying or Meir Jolovitz is saying. Go and listen to what Yasser Arafat said then and what Mahmoud Abbas says today. Mahmoud Abbas stood side by side with Joe Biden and told us that Israel's occupation began in 1948. And not only that, one only needs to go, and it's readily available to any Arab social media, anything, radio, television, it's all run by the Palestinian Authority. And they all refuse to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And yet nobody is willing to address that is what the conflict is. Instead, they talk about solving a Palestinian issue. And we do it at great peril. At great peril. Somebody once said...
let me interject and ask you this.
Please.
So in your Lapid'S speech, you mentioned you reached out to the Arab Society in Israel, and he said Arabs are our partners, they are doctors, they are lawyers, they are this, they are that, going on with all kinds of accomplishments. Okay, so you have an Arab member of Knesset, Ahmed Tibi. Ahmed Tibi was a senior advisor to Yasser Arafat when Arafat was alive. Ahmed Tibi also he's a doctor. He's an accomplished doctor. He's a professional, but he wants no Jewish state. Those are the professionals that Yair Lapid is talking about. What kind of peace plan? With who? And then when you cross over what we call the so-called green line into the territories, Arab towns, huge red signs before you enter into these towns that say, danger to anyone who's Jewish from Israel enter. You're risking your life to go in there. Who are we supposed to? I mean, what is Lapid, Mr. BS artist?
Yes.
The wall. Like what's?
Yeah. Allow me to address
to talk reality.
Yeah. I see the clock is ticking, so let me address that point. At the beginning of his speech, when he talked about the cultural mosaic that you just made reference to, he talked about the fact that Israel's accomplishments in the sciences and this, with the thing. He mentioned Israel has 13 Nobel laureates in the sciences, and they do. 13 Nobel laureates in the sciences. And what are the Arabs doing at the same time? They're building suicide bomb belts and trying to refine them. The piece that was most disturbing of all was the piece that most people thought was the most touching. There was a little segment where Yair Lapid recalls a moment last May 2021 when he said at 3 o'clock in the morning he had to awaken his daughter, his little daughter, who is autistic, and she doesn't speak because missiles and rockets, he said, were being exploded above his house, and they had to rush to the bomb shelters. And he said to the audience listening at the United Nations, how do you explain to a child that can't speak, an autistic child, that there are rockets and missiles that are raining down on us? How do you explain to her? And then he turns around and 3 sentences later offers the Palestinians a state of their own. There's a psychological disorder here. How do I explain to a prime minister of Israel, caretaker as he is, that there is something wrong with you much more than there is with your daughter? That when rockets are falling, and he actually gave a number to them. He said that ever since Israel withdrew from Gaza, which he didn't give the date, but it was in August of 2005, he said, quoting him, over 20,000 missiles have fallen on innocent Israeli children. And his solution is to give them a state of their own. And he said, if only you stop trying to target our children. In essence, I wrote an op-ed about this 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, in which it was titled, The Solution to Peace in the Middle East. Let's reward them if only they stop murdering our children. If they only stop murdering our children, we'll give you a state of your own. It is a psychological disorder. And the moment that everyone thought was so touching was the moment that should have been the most disturbing. The fact that you, at the time, foreign minister, alternate, had to rush down into a bomb shelter to protect your daughter from being killed. And your solution when you become prime minister is to plead and beg with your murderer to establish a state of their own. I'm sorry. The problem, I've said this before, I know Gary, your sidekick there, is quite good with graphic. He knows that anytime I've been on, I throw in that quote from Pogo. In 1953, Pogo, the cartoon, the opossum, his famous line, which actually didn't gain much currency then, we have met the enemy and he is us. That actually gained much, boom! That man is a magic man. Anyhow, Kolakavod. That actually became.
One other thing that we haven't mentioned in this whole talk about a Palestine state is that Judea and Samaria, it's mountainous. It overlooks actually the major cities in Israel proper. So you give them a state, where guns are pointed at us.
It's
That's
insane. It's beyond just you're right. It's beyond just the topographical. It's also, if one looks, if the state of Palestine ever came into being, its missiles, its rockets, much less sophisticated they need to be than anything that is launched from Gaza, because they'd be right there in Israel's border. They would be within 75. They would be within a short rocket fire of 75% of Israel's population, and within short range of 80% of Israel's industrial infrastructure. It is insanity. But also, if one goes and looks at a map, if the state of Palestine is to be created, Israel would once again be at its narrowest 9 miles wide, at its widest 71 miles wide. Tel Aviv would be 11 miles from Palestine. This is absolute insanity. So I urge people to go and look at a map of Israel and Judea and Samaria and Gaza. Mind you, they are separated by 25 miles, and they would have to become contiguous. They have to be connected in order to establish Palestine. And mind you, implicit in what I'm saying is that Palestine would be the confederation of Hamas, yeah, good luck, and the PA, okay, both who want to destroy Israel. But I want to get back to the point. Go look at the map and look at the border that separates today the border that separates Israel from Jordan. It's a straight line down. It's a straight line down. It is 1/4 the distance of what the border would be if Israel gave up that land to create a Palestinian state. All of a sudden. And if you ask any military, well, don't bother to ask the military person. Why don't you go find an 8-year-old boy who's riding a bicycle in his neighborhood and stop him and ask him, is it easier for an army to defend 90 miles or 400 miles? That 8-year-old boy will give you an answer. But all our strategic experts, the ones who are for a two-state illusion, they don't get it. They don't get it. History has not been kind. History has not been kind. We always look back historically, and I don't mean just the case of Israel. Take the case of Europe. Take the case of Europe. Churchill was the anti-peace person. Chamberlain was the pro-peace person. How did history judge that one, my friends? It's insane. There comes a point where we have to understand, and this has been said before, that the only lesson of history is that there are no lessons to be learned from history. We need to be strong, and only through strength will peace come. And I'm I see the clock is ticking, but I'm more than willing to do this again. I appreciate the invitation. We have a problem in Israel, and the problem is, in one last sentence, this is not a war of territory. This is a religious war. If a person understands nothing other than that, they will already be smarter than most professors at Harvard. This is a war. It's an implacable war, a war launched by an implacable enemy, I should say, against Israel. It is religious. It is not territory. And Gaza, the withdrawal from Gaza, unilateral in 2005, is proof of that. Absolutely. Anytime that the Arabs have sat down with Israel to discuss peace, it's to discuss Israel's future demise. It's in order to weaken Israel, it's to truncate Israel's ability to defend itself as far as land mass is concerned. And there comes a point where we need to tell not only the Arabs, but also the American administration and the Israeli government, now, go to hell. Go to hell. This, our cause, will outlive you and your insanity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. Meir, well put.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We'll have you on again to give your input, analysis of the situation. You know, we're just over a month away from the elections. There's going to be a lot more to talk about.
I'll be happy to join you then, my friend. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Shana Tova to every one of you. Thank you.
Shana Tova. Should be a good year.
You as well. Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
Gary. Thank
My
you, Gary.
pleasure. A pleasure. Well, some closing words there before I put a
Sure.
little
Okay.
final comment
Thank
relief.
you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm going to ask all our friends and supporters, please share this on your different social media platforms, be it Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever platform you use. Please share this video. It's uploaded right now on YouTube. It's on our website as well. Also, as we go forward, we need your support. We need you to join us to be part of our investigations into the BDS, various threats against the Jewish people. So send us an email at israelnow.ca. Also, well, that's our website, and send us, go on our website and send us an email. Also, if you could please visit our website, israelnow.ca, and make a contribution to us. We have amazing guests that we bring on. We're informing people what the reality is and what the future should be for the Jewish people. Again, Shana Tova, all the best to everyone. Let's start the year in a great way, and God's showing us already miracles. I mentioned earlier the death of the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Yosef Karadawi, right on Rosh Hashanah. That's a significant sign for the Jewish people. Also on Rosh Hashanah, the Nord Stream pipeline was completely sabotaged, so Europe is going to be even more dependent on Israel. That happened on Rosh Hashanah. There are significant signs that are going on. Israel is incredibly strong, but it's up to us whether we want to have a strong Jewish state or not. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Let me add in closing comment that the CD4HR was very active. We had a lot of people making comments tonight. I just wanted to share with our audience the intellectual beauty of the articulate nature of the ability for the CD4H people to write. So just a little bit on the screen there. So first of all, what I refer to as the Canadian dumbasses for humorous rhetoric. And there's their logo up in the corner there. So this is what they told us tonight. We don't recognize any two states. It's only one state, Palestine. Well, it's only one state, Israel. Obviously, you haven't looked at a map recently. And then Jolovitz, I want you to know that they want to know where they're referring to you as a war criminal, where you're hiding. Well, I don't think you're hiding. They can find you. Just go to social media. He's very accessible. And I would love to meet whoever this is making the comments. I'd love to just have a little armed discussion between you and Meir Jolovitz. Your big talk is on the screen here. And of course, they said missiles are needed for Palestinians to fight your Zionist center, Meir. So they want to blow up the Zionist center. They're calling him a war criminal. Meanwhile, Israel is the one winning Nobel Prizes, selling the gas. So enough of CD4HR. So my last comment, which I made earlier, is not to forget that I don't believe in the one-state solution. I don't believe in the two-state solution. I'm a firm believer in the three-state solution. We have it. Egypt, Israel, and Jordan. Done deal. Move on without any further ado. L'shana tova, everybody. Have a pious Yom Kippur. And we're going to close with Hatikva. We'll see you next week.
יהודי הומייה ולפתן מזרח קדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו התקווה בת שנות
Shalom